So we want to welcome you to the 4th Virginia Immigrant Advocates Summit. We are going to start first by asking the Reverend Clarence Brown to come up here and give us a welcome. Reverend Brown comes from the Annandale United Methodist Church in the Norfolk District. After 7 years of leadership as the district superintendent, he also served as district superintendent of the Charlottesville district, as senior pastor of St. Paul's UNC in Chesapeake, Virginia, and as director of the Westminster Foundation at Norfolk State University. He holds a BA degree from Georgia State University and a degree from Gammon Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia, and is nearing completion of his degree from Wesleyan Theological Seminary. Reverend Brown is known across the conference for his strong preaching, his expertise in church revitalization, and his mentoring of young pastors. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Clarence Brown.
Good morning. Well, that was sad. You've been awake at least an hour now. Good morning. How are the people of God this morning? Are you well? Is it a good morning? Of course it's a good morning. And you know why it's a good morning? It is because this is the day that the Lord has made. Let me welcome you, all of my friends, to Annandale United Methodist Church. Annandale is a marvelous faith community here in Fairfax County, where we do attempt to do all that we can in all the ways that we can to love our God, to love our neighbors, and to serve God's world. We believe we're here to make disciples of Christ for the transformation of the world and to serve our neighbors, all of our neighbors. Somebody say all means all. And so we are glad that you are here to continue a conversation to see how we might indeed make life better for all of our neighbors here in Annandale and the metropolitan Fairfax County area, and indeed throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. As you may have already discovered, our necessary moves are a la izquierda, ¿tú sabes? Outside to the left. And if you need anything, please find me, our tremendous associate pastor, Eduardo Carrillo, or people wearing the bright green t-shirts. We are glad that you are here for a day of learning and for action. So once again, welcome to one and all to this wonderful place. God bless you today.
Thank you, Reverend Brown. We appreciate hospitality here and making this wonderful facility available for this 4th annual Immigrant Advocates Summit. Thank you. I'm going to make a couple announcements to get things started first. We were hoping to have simultaneous translation available right now, but there's been a little bit of a minor, I understand, fender bender that the interpreters were involved in. And so they should be shortly here, so we hope. And so as soon as they are, I'm hoping they will let us know, and then we would begin using their services. I'll say it in English now, and I'll say a little bit in Spanish as well about that. The folks who may need translating devices, we have them on the left side as you come out. There's a table on the left, come out of the hall here to the left. There's a table there with those translating devices that you have available for you. Ha habido un pequeño retraso con los intérpretes. Lamentablemente tuvieron un accidente que dicen que relativamente no fue muy serio, pero bueno, es un accidente, ¿verdad? Y es un rollo de cosas, así que están lidiando con eso ahorita los intérpretes. Tan pronto lleguen nos van a notificar, y cuando estén aquí pues vamos a empezar a usar sus servicios. Si necesita traducción, si necesita el aparatito para traducción, están aquí a salir de aquí a la izquierda. Hay una mesita donde puede recoger su aparatito para tenerlo y no perder ninguna de los que están aquí. Así que por ahora, disculpen que no tenemos esa traducción disponible. And before I introduce our panelists, we have been joined by a representative from the Honorable Congressman Jerry Connolly, General Representative from his office, Mike Collins, who's Fairfax County Director. Mike, thank you for being here.
Hi, everybody.
I don't see any elected officials here, so if you see anybody, please someone let me know. Okay, so I'll introduce the panel that we have today. We have an exciting day of action here. The goal of this panel is to help us all to be better advocates for the rights of immigrants here in our Commonwealth in the state of Virginia. First, we'll hear from Claire Castañaga and Tim Freilich about immigrant advocacy efforts in the General Assembly. We're planning to take a quick look back at the last decade of immigrant advocacy efforts in Richmond to help us understand what happened last year and to help us prepare for the year ahead. Then we will get the Commonwealth Institute's latest numbers regarding the economic contributions of immigrants from Michael and Michael Cassidy. So let me give a quick introduction of our panelists. I happen to have the privilege to know a couple of them very well. Let me talk first about Michael Cassidy, who's president and CEO of the Commonwealth Institute. Michael is the president and CEO of the Commonwealth Institute for Fiscal Analysis, a nonprofit think tank focused on providing independent research, analysis, and public education on budget and tax issues, with emphasis on the impact of fiscal decisions on low and moderate income Virginians. He has an impressive, long resume of wonderful accomplishments. Michael graduated from Georgetown University and has a master's degree in public policy from the College of William and Mary, where he was a Thomas Jefferson Fellow. Let's give a warm hand for Michael Cassidy. My good friend and longtime friend and director of the Immigrant Advocates Program in the Legal Aid Justice Center, Tim Freilich. He is the legal director of the Legal Aid Justice Center's Immigrant Advocates Program, which supports low-income immigrants in their effort to find justice and fair treatment. Tim earned his bachelor's and his law degree at the University of Virginia, where he received the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Public Service. I could literally stand here and talk about an hour, maybe longer, about his accomplishment. But in the interest of time, and he does have an impressive resume. Tim was the first David Carline Public Interest Awardee, a national award given in recognition of fearless, uncompromising, and creative advocacy on behalf of marginalized people. Tim lives in downtown Charlottesville with his wife and 2 young daughters. Let's give one hand for Tim Freilich. We also have Claire Castañaga, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia. Claire is the Executive Director, and Ms. Castañaga has more than 30 years of legal and government relations experience at the federal, state, and local levels. She was the first woman to serve as Virginia's Chief Deputy Attorney General. The best man for the job was a woman. Her name is Claire Castañaga. And she has served as a senior advisor to the leadership of the Virginia General Assembly, holding positions including Chief of Staff and Counsel to the Speaker of the Virginia House, Legislative Council of Democratic Leader, Legislative Council, and I can go on and on. One of the simplified things I can tell you about her, she is a terrific advocate for immigrants. She's a smart, determined woman, and she has been a tremendous advocate on behalf of thousands of Virginians, many who don't know her, but her determination in the General Assembly has allowed many of us to advocate on behalf of immigrants for years. So she's a true Commonwealth hero, and I would say an American hero. She might not recognize it, but I would say that. Let's welcome Claire Castañaga. So, let me start with Tim, and just generally, what are we talking about when we're talking about Virginia immigrants? Let's get the conversation going.
Sure, well, I'll talk a little bit about that. Thank you, Walter. And it's great to see so many dear friends and leading immigrant community leaders and advocates here gathered for the 4th Summit. Every year, this is one of the highlights to come down here and talk to this group. So thank you for having me again. I'm going to give a brief overview of who are the immigrants here in Virginia. Who are immigrants in Virginia? I went to the census.gov website just to get the latest numbers for you. And guess what? It's not just the government that's shut down, it's the entire internet. No, it's not. But the census.gov website, there are no numbers to be found.
Well, the NSA is still operating.
That's what I understand. Fortunately, we have Michael Cassidy here. He's got the latest numbers for you at the end of our session. But some of the other numbers that I can definitely share that are still current, more than 11% of Virginians were born outside of the United States. Okay, more than 11%. Of Virginia's foreign-born, 47% are U.S. citizens. And as we come up on the election day here in Virginia, that's a key number. It's only a key number, though, if all 47% who are U.S. citizens actually exercise the right to vote. So I'm sure everybody here will vote who is able to. But you also need to talk to all of your friends and family and make sure that any of Virginia's foreign-born, any of Virginia's immigrants who are U.S. citizens exercise the right to vote. At the same time, we have 47% citizens. We have an estimated, according to the Pew Hispanic Center, an estimated 250,000 unauthorized immigrants in Virginia, undocumented immigrants. All right. Now, I like, for several years now, I've done a little pop quiz, and it's exciting because the numbers keep changing. Right? We're talking about, so where do Virginia's immigrants come from? Okay, what continent has the largest share of Virginia's immigrants? Where do they come from? And so this is a pop quiz here, show of hands. How many folks think from Latin America? How about Asia? Europe? Africa? All right. 40.7% of Virginia's immigrants are from Asia. Okay, Asia sends the largest number of folks here to Virginia. Latin America is second with 36.4%, and then lower percentages for Europe and Africa. But that's a key point that we need to understand for our immigrant advocacy efforts here in Virginia. I want to give a special welcome to our Asian Pacific American friends who are here today. I know Dan Choi, the president of the Coalition of Asian Pacific Americans in Virginia, is here somewhere. Dan? He's probably working. He's working out front there. But anyway, glad that you folks are all here. Here's another question. What is the top country of birth of Virginia's immigrants? So breaking it down a little bit further. Let's get a show of hands here. The choices are, let's say, India, Korea, or El Salvador. India. How many people think Korea? How many for El Salvador? All right, we got a well-schooled crowd here. 10.8% of Virginia's immigrants come from El Salvador, 8% from India, and 6.5% from Korea. Michael's going to get into numbers much more. Claire, you have something?
Yeah, I'm going to do my own little pop quiz here.
So, the battles here in Virginia.
We're going to do a little bit more pop quiz here. So, I want to talk about which localities have the highest percentage of Hispanic residents. Highest percentage of Hispanic residents. So, how many think that's Arlington? Okay. How many think that's Prince William? How many think that's Manassas Park? How many think that's Alexandria? How many think that's Fairfax County? How many think that's Galax? The reality is that the highest percentage of Hispanic residents are in Manassas Park and Manassas City, with 32 and 31% each. Prince William comes next with 20%. Alexandria City at 16%, Fairfax City at 15.8%, Fairfax County not on the top list, and Galax is soon behind Fairfax City. If you look at a map that has density of color, there's this tiny little dark dot down in southwest Virginia, and that's Galax, where there are Christmas tree farms and tobacco farmers, and the percentage of Hispanic population is higher than it is in a number of the places that we normally expect to believe that about.
And Michael's going to have a little bit more information, statistics on the population later at the end, but we should probably move on to...
Yeah, no, I think one of the important things to give some context is Virginia, you may recall, this is where September 11th took place. Here, the Penn is actually located in Arlington County, my jurisdiction. As a result of that, things began changing till the attitudes toward immigrants. And so the then number of legislative battles began, because anti-immigrant legislation began to be submitted left and right. And Tim and Claire are no strangers to those battles that we have to take on, and working together with starting to build a coalition, actually continue with some of the relationships we had built through the 90s into the right after that period. And Claire, you're no stranger to those battles.
Yeah, I want to echo Tim's gratitude to all of you for being here today and for being such strong advocates on behalf of the community. And I wanted to introduce you to my new team at the ACLU, if I can take a minute to do that. I have a new Director of Public Policy and Communications who's here today, Frank Knack. I have a new Associate Director of Public Policy and Communication, Aisha Huertas Mickle. And the person who's going to be coordinating our immigration policy efforts in the future, Joseph Montano. And they'll be at the table in the back, and please introduce yourselves to them and help them feel welcome, because they're just kind of getting their feet wet, and next year one of them will be up here. So I'm really excited about the new team. And partly I'm excited because we have been fighting these battles for a long time, and as Walter points out, anybody who needs me, scream out "Más despacio" if you need that, because I have a tendency to go a little quickly. You know, we started with 9/11, and there is a mythology out there that the people that were flying those planes somehow were advantaged by having Virginia identification, and that became a rallying cry early on. And I first got engaged with the initiatives that a lot of you have been involved with in the fight over legal presence for driver's licenses. And that kind of started in 2002 and with a study and crystallized in 2003 with a bill, and as of January 1, 2004, we were one of the first states to have a codified requirement that you must show legal presence to get a driver's license in Virginia. And that, you know, when I took over at the ACLU a year ago, one of the things I've had to do to educate the people at our national offices, the unfortunate truth about Virginia is that we are a leader in the nation in anti-immigrant policy. We follow no one. We did driver's licenses in 2004. We passed legislation, not we, they. The legislature passed legislation in 2005 requiring legal presence for public benefits. We were victimized in 2008 by a statewide bill that requires a check on arrest for everybody who is taken into custody. That same year we had a limitation on bail. I mean, it just goes on, and in the middle of all that we had the work that John Liss was heavily involved with in Prince William, where the Prince William County Board looked at an ordinance which was absolutely across the board the model for SB 1070. It was written by the same people. It was beta tested, if you will, in Prince William, and through the efforts of a lot of people in this room, ultimately it was reformed from what was proposed, which was to have every single police officer on the street on every given day empowered and required to be immigration enforcement officers. It got pulled back from there, and in some respects the Prince William Ordinance is now on all fours with the statewide law. But the reality is that when I talk to people in Alabama and Arizona and Georgia and other southern states, almost all the things that, not everything, but because we've managed to fight off some of the things that have actually passed in these other states, but we were kind of ground zero, and we were ground zero in part because of the emotional torque that came out of 9/11.
I think, whenever you're discussing immigrant advocacy, the efforts on the state level, I think a lot of the policies that Claire was discussing really, if you're a state elected official and you're frustrated, right? Because Congress's failure to pass comprehensive immigration reform on the federal level is really the issue here, right? And so if you're a state elected official, you're going to try and figure out, well, what can I do? What can I do here in my own state legislature to try and fix what everyone acknowledges at this point is a severely broken, dysfunctional set of immigration laws, right? And so that continues to be a main issue. And so while we talk about the struggles here in Richmond, we certainly urge everyone here to continue the excellent work that you've been doing, pushing for comprehensive immigration reform on the federal level. And there was a group of advocates and community leaders who got together in the last year to talk about, well, what would true comprehensive immigration reform look like for Virginia? What is it that we want here in Virginia? And there was I urge folks to check out the website of the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, VACIR.org, I think is their website. But the principles that were set out are that true reform should, one, offer a short and direct path to citizenship for all aspiring citizens already in the U.S. It should respect the dignity of every individual and end the mass detention and deportation of immigrants. Reform should reunite and strengthen families through the elimination of immigration backlogs. It should build trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement by limiting state and local enforcement of federal immigration laws. Reform should strengthen our economy by protecting workers' rights and meeting Virginia's need for a trained workforce by providing access to education for all. And finally, it should honor our history as a nation of immigrants by welcoming, celebrating, and promoting the full economic and political integration of this most recent generation of immigrants. Hopefully, if comprehensive immigration reform passes on the federal level, that would, along the lines of those principles, it would resolve many of the issues that we have struggled with in Richmond and General Assembly year after year. And so keep doing the excellent work on the push for comprehensive immigration reform on the federal level.
Indeed, I was going to say, indeed, you know, and as you mentioned earlier about our early struggles with issues like the driver's licenses, and one of the things we want to and focus today is for you to continue, everyone here to continue to be engaged. I was engaged at the time when I served in the task force that was discussing the issue of the driver's license. Remember, Claire? And there were people sitting at the table who actually felt that it's okay to have a license. You know, I was advocating, well, can we have an alternative license for people who are non-U.S. citizens? And they said, well, okay, why don't we have one that says foreigner or illegal alien? And they were serious. They were serious in this conversation. And we were arguing back and forth. I said, you know, can we find a more dignified way to find a way in which people can have licenses, be able to drive? And the Attorney General at the time said, no, we're not going to allow that. And I said, well, the opinion of one lawyer can be contradicted by the opinion of another lawyer, so I want the governor's lawyer to review it too. So we've been back and forth those kind of things. In the end, it was decided that a digit, there would be a number on the driver's license, if I remember correctly, that would identify that, and that was a little bit more dignified, just part of the numbers that you find in a driver's license. So there are ways, and as we advocate and work together, we can find ways in which it can still find the way to respect the dignity of immigrants, but it takes us working together and engaged.
And so, if I could, Walter, really quickly, and that was, I think, an incredible example, actually. Walter's involvement was so critical to derailing what would have been licenses labeled if you were an immigrant. In red letters, they would say that you were not a U.S. citizen.
Or have a big fat T on them. You know how, right. You know how underage licenses are vertical and grown-up licenses are horizontal? Well, they wanted to have everybody who had a limited duration license, because it was attached to status, have a big T on the license, so that when you went to cash a check or you showed your ID, anywhere you went, you would be announcing that you're only temporarily here. It was a heroic change to have that not happen. That occurred, I think, largely because of folks like Walter being willing to serve on, I think it was called like the DMV Subcommittee Task Force Commission on Driver, you know, it was just not a very sexy title of an organization to join to try and make a difference. Yet by volunteering on this really obscure commission, Walter was able to do a great service in terms of not having that label put on driver's licenses. So get involved. That's the message.
And that was just one of multitude of other struggles there.
Right. Yeah, put us in a position to go to the governor's mansion and have a pretty heart-to-heart with the governor about what would happen if he didn't do the right thing. I mean, the thing about Virginia is every bad idea about immigration policy that you've read about in the United States has been introduced in Virginia. I mean, not all in the same year, except for 2008, where there were 100 and some odd bills, and I think almost every bad idea was represented in the legislation that was introduced. But I mean, we've had the limits on driver's licenses, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. We've had efforts to limit access to education, either by requiring parents to come in and show their status in order to enroll their kids, which we were able to follow, or a complete ban on attending public colleges in universities, or a ban on, ever qualifying for in-state tuition. We have had various and sundry limitations on access to benefits. We were able to narrow the bill that was introduced in 2005 to require legal presence for state benefits so that it is exactly identical to federal requirements that were already there. So it didn't go beyond what was already being required by the federal government. We've had people suggest that you should be disqualified for unemployment comp if you get fired because you spoke a language other than English in the workplace, and it would have defined that as misconduct. We've had efforts to about 9 or 10% of people in Virginia take the driver's license exam in a language other than English, and people tried to stop that. We now have a law that says that if you drive without a license and you get arrested under the state statute, they can impound your vehicle and take it away from you. And there have been these efforts to try to expand state and local police enforcement of immigration. And those are the ones that concern me the most right now, because if the SAFE Act, S-A-F-E Act, passes in Congress, it is a wholesale, broad authorization for state, essentially the adoption of immigration policy at the state and local level. And right now we have some preemption, which means it's a federal issue, and local, we can constrain local and state involvement. But if the SAFE Act were to pass, it would be this sort of carte blanche to all the state and local police agencies, and those issues will resurface.
Has there been anything good?
A couple of good things. We did manage to get a victim immigrant witness bill through the Senate 3 years in a row without a dissenting vote, including votes in both committee and on the floor by now Attorney General Cuccinelli when he was senator. Passed the Senate 3 times, really thought we had a great bill, but there's a delegate from Prince William named Jackson Miller who single-handedly whipped the House Court Committee to the point where we can't get the bill through the House. But it was a very important conversation, and lots of local law enforcement guys stepped up and said, we think this is good policy and we think it would be good to apply it statewide. We've done some really good things to enhance our laws on human trafficking. We have a funny custom in Virginia. We don't write bills that say, this is the Comprehensive Human Trafficking Law, or the Human Trafficking Prohibition Act, and then all these things come under it. And that confuses people about whether we have strong human trafficking laws. The reality is we do, but they're piecemeal. So you have to go look at the extortion statute and see that it's criminal to use somebody's immigration status as a club in the workplace to try to get them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be required to do. We've had bills introduced that would allow in-state tuition for undocumented students, and broadly, and then also specific to DACA students. We'll talk about more of that. So yeah, we've had some good stuff. It's just not as much good stuff.
But yet, with all the conversations we've had now for years and over a decade now, some topics still come up. The denial of driver licenses, which some of us felt, hey, people should be able, if you're going down the road, shouldn't you have some kind of document that tells you you passed the driver's test so that you have, the safety on the road and have people get insurance and all those things. So those can continue to be. In addition, the in-state tuition issue that some of us feel strongly that our students who came here of no fault of their own, going through our Commonwealth schools, graduated, have good grades, they should be able to go to college at in-state tuition. Kids aren't asking for a free ride; they're asking them, to earn it. And so those issues continue to come up. Now, how many people here?
With Senator Hanger's help, we were able to get a policy, legislative policy through the Senate that would have let people dream. And then last year, through Delegate Alfonso Lopez's hard work, we got a bill through the, further along in the House than we ever had before. But that in-state tuition issue, the problem is that when people try to do good things, somebody always turns around and introduces a bill that says, we're going to ban it completely.
And there are going to be detailed sessions on both the driver's license issue and the the in-state tuition issue later today.
Yeah.
But we really wanted to give a sense of sort of the history on these efforts, because we think it's really important. There's a lot of talk, particularly on the driver's license issue, of removing the legal presence requirement or trying to get that removed. And so we just wanted to give sort of the background, because it was really one of the issues, one of the key issues back in 2002 that first brought the immigrant advocacy community together to work in Richmond and focus on what was going on in Richmond. John List was mentioned earlier. I know he was a key force behind the Virginians for Fair Access to Driver's Licenses. That was the group that was formed back in 2002. At the same time, you had a group of committed advocates who were working with Governor Warner at the time, now Senator Warner, but Governor Warner's office, to host the governor's first Latino summit. And at the same time, you had the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations being formed. Is Edgar Aranda? Yeah, there he is in the back, the chair of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations now. There was a lot going on that really was started around the driver's license issue. So.
And Tim, a lot of the focus seemed to be toward the undocumented immigrants here. So if it's the undocumented people were the cause of terrorism, how many undocumented terrorists for the September 11 disaster, or how many were clear?
Nada.
Right. Well, so
Not a single one.
So this is how that debate went, and this is what we want to convey to folks who were not in Richmond in 2003 during the General Assembly session when the battle over driver's licenses was being fought. Right. This is what it sounded like.
Well, let's talk about what it looked like. What it looked like in part, although the people didn't look like you all, they weren't as diverse, but there were as many of them as are in this room today, and they all had a certain similar accoutrement. They all had these red stop signs that said no more 9/11s. And so if I were a legislator sitting in the committee in the front of the room like I am now, I would look out and I would see the sea of pretty uniform faces, all of whom older people who vote disproportionately, right? You know that they're more likely to vote than other age groups. All of them have these signs on that say no more 9/11s. And you would stand up in front of the room and you would say, look, guys, the people who flew those planes into every single one of them was legally present. Every one of them was legally present. Some of them...
No, they're terrorists. No more 9/11.
Yeah, but they were legally present, and more importantly, under the bill that we have, the law we have now, they could get driver's licenses today.
What part of illegal don't you understand?
And then, you would say, well, let's talk about what driver's licenses are for. They're about reassuring the public that people on our roads actually know the rules of the road and are safe and are insured, and that's what a driver's license is about. That's what it's for, and it's supposed to tell who you are, where you live, whether you know how to drive. It's not about, all this other stuff, like using them to enforce immigration laws.
Well, we don't care if law enforcement knows who they are. We want law enforcement to deport them all.
And then we would really talk about why it was important for everyone to have access to a driver's license. This seems sort of self-evident. You kind of need to get to work, and Virginia is not the public transportation capital of America. So people work hard, and they need to be able to drive to work. They need to be able to take their kids to school and go to the doctors. They need to do the things we all do.
And in addition to that, we've had some other services, other topics come up that have come in generations before. Like, they should speak English. And English should be the official language of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
I don't want to press 1 for English.
Don't want to press 1 for English. Don't want to press 2 for Spanish.
And so, to keep it entertaining, I've made fun of folks who were,
very
passionately arguing against the accessibility for driver's licenses without proving you're lawfully present. But what folks who are thinking about refighting this issue need to understand is that here in Virginia, there is a huge swath of the population here in Virginia who continues to live in fear. Right. And they want somebody to blame, and the group that they have chosen to blame with a broad brush, in many cases, are the immigrants of Virginia.
Right.
Okay? And you need to understand that going in, that even though I've sort of joked about it, it's a serious matter. They are firmly held, sincerely held beliefs that any effort is going to have to work with and understand, okay, in order to try and move the issue forward.
And you'll, there's a certain frustration when the response you get when you are making cogent and rational arguments grounded in fact, that the person that you're talking to says, well, your facts aren't worth the toilet paper they're written on. You know, facts don't matter in this debate sometimes. It's very emotional.
And fighting the bill that was requiring legal presence in order to get a driver's license, it was like jumping out onto the tracks in front of a fast-moving train. Okay, there was no chance whatsoever that this bill was going to be stopped. Yet, those of us who were working the issues at the time felt like somebody needed to say something anyway. But you need to be aware that, and it'll be discussed in the panel this afternoon, that if this is a fight that's going to be waged again, it's really long odds.
And it would be easy to give up sometimes because you get thinking, oh my God, there's no hope. We keep fighting. Things seem to be coming back. People are not getting elected.
I just thought of a great argument. I just thought of a great argument.
But there's hope.
I've talked all week to the media about DMV's new, role as the statewide database. I don't know if you've been reading about this, but there's one of the problems that we have with this legal presence law and the perception of driver's licenses generally is we've so far gotten away from the idea of a driver's license as empowering you to drive safely to something else that we're using them to, if you drive away from the pump, you can lose your license. If you don't pay your child support, you can use your license. And we have all these things that have nothing to do with safety on the roads that have gotten tied to licenses, including the legal presence requirement. Well, now DMV, without having any conversation with us or had our permission, is going to be using our information, our pictures, which because we're not allowed to smile anymore, they can use for facial recognition, our vital statistics, our social security numbers, all that stuff. They're going to make that available to other state agencies for Medicaid and social security, social welfare, and for enforcement, and for regularization, and for access. So I figure we should go back and argue that allowing all the undocumented people to get driver's licenses is going to improve that database. And if we're going to invade people's privacy, let's invade everybody's privacy equally.
But the reality is it can get frustrating, very frustrating when it seems that there's no hope. Right. Yet, when the odds seem impossible, we have states like Maryland that have been able to approve the DREAM Act. And as we say, all politics is local. Someone said that. And for us, it means here in the Commonwealth, it means your own counties, your own cities, here in the state of Virginia. It didn't seem a while ago possible in Maryland. But people advocated, and in fact, not only that, but let's talk about driver's licenses in Virginia, in Maryland as well. Now, what are the chances, Claire, and Michael, that we might have the DREAM Act enacted in Virginia or driver's licenses for undocumented in Virginia?
Well, let me first say how proud we were at the ACLU that we were able to write to the DMV commissioner right after the DACA empowerment was put into place, and we were able to get our Virginia DMV commissioner to acknowledge that everybody who has deferred action status is already eligible for a driver's license in Virginia. And we have that letter up on our website, so if you ever have a problem and you're on deferred action status, that's written into our code, and we were able to get our commissioner to acknowledge that in writing. So, we're proud of that, but you know what? There are two states, really, that you're not allowed to mention ever in the General Assembly, and one of them is Maryland, the other is California. And it's because our General Assembly prides itself on not being that, in the sense of they see those two states as liberal enclaves, dominated by, people who don't think like them. So, I'm so happy for Maryland and feel really positive that that's an opportunity, but, they've also acknowledged same-sex marriage, and we're fighting that battle here as well.
So you're saying Virginia is not quite the same as Maryland?
And it isn't, and if you pick up the Washington Post today, the issue that, one of the other issues we need to expand to be able to be thinking about being a part of is the question about how we elect our public officials to our legislature. Redistricting is what it's called. And as long as we let legislators choose their voters instead of voters choosing their legislators, we are not going to be able to move some of these issues the way we'd like to. We have a districting process which is driven by partisan politics and, most importantly, incumbent protection. And what that means is that we don't have contested elections. We don't have a choice about who our legislator is. They are chosen in increasingly narrow bands of both parties who show up at firehouse primaries or conventions as opposed to any kind of public process. And so our legislature is almost 70% in the House made up of people that are not going to vote for things that we would want them to vote for, because they come from nominating processes in which doing something like what Maryland did would not stand them in good stead politically. So, but in-state tuition is evolving.
Yeah, I think we should jump to, we have just a few minutes left, but we should jump to what we think might happen in this upcoming General Assembly.
Right.
What do you think we're going to see?
Well, I think we'll see another effort to do a DREAM Act, whether it's going to be a broad-scale DREAM Act for all of the...
And that's the in-state tuition access for...
Access to in-state tuition for children who are here, people who've been here since they were children. All the bills that we've ever been able to get any traction on have limitations. I mean, they require people to prove that they pay taxes. They require proof that you've been here a certain period of time, that you graduated from a Virginia school. One of the questions is whether the bills that are introduced are going to be limited to deferred action status students or not.
And for folks who didn't make it to Richmond last General Assembly session, after years of fighting these bans on admission to public colleges and universities for undocumented, and years of fighting on the in-state tuition issue, there was a stunning hearing. It was the House Subcommittee on Higher Education. The room was absolutely packed, and this was the bill on whether DACA recipients, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival recipients, should be eligible for in-state tuition. One after another, representatives from the different colleges and universities in Virginia stood up and said, yes, we support this bill. You had advocates one after another supporting the bill, guidance counselors, students, and after all the statements in support, not a single person stood up in opposition to the bill.
Right.
It sailed through the subcommittee 5-0, got to the full House committee, where it was then just referred on to Appropriations Committee to die. Right? And so there was this great hope that was then just squashed. So even though early on it was allowed to go forward, I think it was sort of a predetermined outcome.
Yeah, but it's the process that I've gone before. And I think that it bodes well as what could happen down the line if we stay engaged, if we participate, and if we know some of the statistics, some of the numbers that make a difference, particularly when it comes to economic power and contributions that immigrants bring. And so let me make a transition, because the time is getting a little short. Hopefully we can get time for a few questions. Let me turn it over. You can get the last comment in, and then we can get to Michael to make his presentation.
We're watching it all. Yeah, I know. One of the things that concerns us about the advocacy around DREAM Act and DACA is, we really want to be careful about not creating this idea that there are, some people who are here who we should be doing nice things for, and other people who are here that we should define. I think one of the differently, and one of the things I've seen the Dreamers do very eloquently is start to have the conversation about not wanting to demonize their parents as a part of the rhetorical argument for the DREAM Act, and I think we need to be careful about that too. But yeah, 2013 was remarkable in the fact that the House of Delegates, which has been unrelentingly hostile to even having the conversation about in-state tuition, at least did have a hearing and had the conversation. And I think we can probably see, similar kinds of things, and maybe we can move further this year. But, we also moved some human trafficking awareness bills through last year. But, this in 2014, I expect to see additional efforts to make people prove citizenship as a part of the, the voting process, either at the polls or at registration. I was really excited about the work you were able to do on wage payments last year.
So there was the Department of Labor and Industry is supposed to assist folks collecting unpaid wages. They were defunded about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and that impacts a lot of low-wage workers, immigrant workers combined, when suddenly there isn't an administrative option for them to try to recover their wages. We had a bill that was put forward that was said, fine, if the state isn't going to assist these workers in recovering their money, then let's make it so the individual worker can easily find an attorney to take these cases, provide for attorney's fees, damages, and a penalty if they don't pay what they should have paid originally. We're still talking about whether or not it's worth ultimately the agency was given its funding back, and they've begun hiring investigators again to get that up and going again. But there may still be more work on that.
Just to put a period on the sentence, one of the things that it's sort of the good news, bad news story, which is our guys did so much of the bad stuff early that they're sort of short of ideas about more bad stuff to do. And there is a shift in the appetite for anti-immigrant legislation. So, and maybe in the law enforcement sector we'll see some stuff this session. But I'm hoping for a quiet session.
Well, we'll have to see, right? Because
remember,
a lot of stuff that this has been a quick overview so that we know where we've been, where we kind of are, and how we can move together to advocate. And then, so it'll be more detailed, for instance, about in-state tuition later today. But in the meantime also, it's important that we know some of those numbers. What are the contributions? Are there any positive contributions? Michael Cass has been sitting there patiently, waiting his turn. So Michael, your turn.
Thank you. So, as Tim and Claire have outlined for us so helpfully, the landscape of both some of the history of the challenging political and policy environment that we have faced here in Virginia over a number of years, as well as some potential issues coming down the pike in the coming General Assembly session. Part of what can help strengthen all of our advocacy around either advancing positive policies on behalf of the immigrant community in our state, like by having a state DREAM Act version get adopted here in Virginia, or defending against some of these draconian anti-immigrant pieces of legislation that we have seen in the past and we will likely to continue to see, is to try to use all of the key information and the tremendously positive story that we have to tell about the positive and significant contributions that immigrants make to Virginia's economy. And so how I'm going to close out this first session before we open it up for Q&A is to share with you what are some of the key findings in that area that then everybody can use and integrate into their own advocacy efforts as you go to educate your own communities, your own organizations, your own lawmakers about why defeating a really bad bill is so critical, how these things are threats to a large and important segment of our workforce. Folks will have those findings and that key information at your fingertips. So what's been distributed around to you is this infographic that we put together at the Commonwealth Institute that you all can use. Feel free to download it. It's going to be on our website. Make copies of this. Use this in any of your outreach engagement. Draw from it as you write op-ed pieces in your local papers or letters to the editor or have sign-on letters to your lawmakers. And so what I'd like to do is go through what are some of these very key and compelling findings about the significant contributions that immigrants make to Virginia's economy. Now, thankfully, my staff at the Commonwealth Institute downloaded this data before the shutdown. So unlike Tim, we didn't face a darkened website by the federal government agencies. And some of the data that I'm about to share that is included in this infographic, some of the numbers are slightly different than the ones that Tim shared, just because we used slightly different data sets in pulling the numbers together. But so this really outlines how Virginia's workforce, as we all know, is among the most productive and highly educated and highest earning in the nation. And that a key part of that strong economic engine and that strong workforce is the immigrant community in our state. So as Tim outlined with some of his questions in his pop quiz, the immigrant population here in Virginia is large and it's very diverse. So we're 8th in the country in terms of the number of foreign-born residents. It's about 950,000 foreign-born Virginians. And this diversity of the countries of origin comes as quite a surprise to most people. In the United States as a whole, about 1/3 of the foreign-born population comes from just one country, Mexico. Whereas as you can see in Virginia, Mexico is actually number 3 in terms of the share of our foreign-born population whose nation of origin is Mexico. And in Virginia, it's only 6.3% of the foreign-born population. And so what you see in some of this display at the top speaks to that great diversity of the countries of origin of the immigrant population here in Virginia. And I think that can be helpful to pricking some of these bubbles of misconception about the immigrant population in our state, and can be useful to articulating to folks in the community and lawmakers saying, hey, wait a second, this is a large and very diverse, so check your assumptions at the door, and here's the numbers to do that. The other key element to Virginia's immigrant population is that Virginia's immigrants are very well educated. What the next portion of the infographic lays out are the numbers to back that story up. Nearly 40% of Virginian immigrants had college degrees or higher in 2002. So that's pretty significant and far outpaces the percentages that you find at the national level. And so what we have in Virginia is a highly educated community as well, which can again be useful to pushing back against arguments that what you have is sort of a low-skilled workforce in the immigrant population. Because in fact, our population here in Virginia is highly educated. In addition, the other key challenge that we face, of course, is this notion that immigrants are takers, right? That they've come to our community and they're taking our public welfares, their benefits, they're taking our jobs, and they're just takers. And that, especially around this argument that folks in the immigrant community are somehow just milking the public welfare system dry, there is tremendously compelling data about how that's not true in Virginia, because they're very actively engaged in the labor force. So when we speak about how the principal reason why folks come to this country is to work, here in Virginia we have very compelling evidence that shows that to be the case. So, for example, the foreign-born population in Virginia has much higher labor participation rates than does the native-born population. So 73% of the immigrants in our Commonwealth are engaged in the labor force in some way. They're working full-time, they're working part-time, they are looking for work, they are engaged in the labor force. Whereas for the native-born population, that number is smaller, it's 65.3%. And so that, I think, is a very compelling evidence to show how immigrants are here to work, and they're actively participating in our state's economy and in the labor force. The other thing about it is everybody in American politics loves small business. We love entrepreneurs. The small business person is really an icon of the American political dialogue in our country. And there are also compelling findings with regard to that side of immigrant contributions to the economy here in Virginia. So while immigrants make up only 17.2% of all entrepreneurs in the state, they drove 40% of the growth in entrepreneurship during the first decade of this new millennium. So between 2000 and 2010, 40% of the growth in entrepreneurship in Virginia were immigrants. So that speaks to the very robust way in which folks are not only engaged in the labor market, but also doing it by having their own business, by being entrepreneurs, and being speaking to that sort of classic American dream, and the numbers back it up. And then finally, because immigrants are out there working at high degrees, participating in the labor force, because they're highly educated in Virginia, they end up having strong levels of income. So one of the other bubbles of misconception is, of course, that immigrants are low wage, that they're just mowing lawns, cleaning houses, and they're very low wage. Whereas when you look at the data, you find that in Virginia, immigrant households compare very favorably when it comes to median income. And so you see how Virginia's foreign-born population, for example, has a higher median income than the native-born population. Over $66,000 a year in household income is the median, and that compares very favorably to $61,000 for native-born population. It also exceeds the foreign-born population's median income for the nation as a whole and the native-born population's median household income for the nation as a whole. And so that also, I think, speaks to the very significant economic contributions that the foreign-born population is making here to our state. And so these kinds of things, Claire's right, facts don't carry the day in all arguments. We're up against, obviously, very significant ideological arguments, very significant negative rhetoric, very hostile frame in terms of a lot of these issues and these arguments. But there are portions of the public discourse, there are some lawmakers who can be persuaded with key information, and you can have them take a second look at something when you are leading with some very compelling, rock-solid numbers that especially counter these misconceptions that are out there. And so hopefully this kind of information can be helpful to all of us as we work in the coming legislative session to advance the cause of immigrants in our Commonwealth.
Indeed, and one of the most important things here is that our facts, which are usually backed by pretty intensive studies that provide that information, may not be accepted by someone else as their fact. They might want to use other type of information. Sadly, that is the case, but we need to strongly get as much information as possible and be able to cite the sources such as the one that Michael has quoted.
And to that point, Walter, as we engage in our policy debates on these issues, one of the elements of the mission of our organization at the Commonwealth Institute is to support the advocacy of others. And so we work very closely with many of you here in this room and others throughout the state while legislation is being considered to think through what are the counter-arguments to some of the rhetoric we're hearing, and then our staff can sort of crunch the numbers and try to respond so that we have some counterpoints to make so that we are making the best case we can in trying to advance these causes and defeat this bad legislation. And so especially as groups here today are working on a particular issue or something through the various coalitions that we all work on, bring those things up and we can work together to find ways to counter that and to explain information to push back against those really bad arguments.
And I think we have time for a couple of questions. We have a volunteer who has a microphone. And before I ask you to raise your hand for the first question, let me check in with the interpreters. Have the interpreters arrived? ¿Ya llegaron? Okay,
no,
still waiting. Thank you. Okay, as soon as they are, we will make sure that the services are utilized. And just to also let you know, we will, at this point of question, we would appreciate if you keep it within the advocacy effort here in Virginia, in the context of the General Assembly and some of the things that are going on here. Later today, in fact, coming up, we'll hear a panel on the Affordable Care Act. We will then have a panel on immigration reform at the federal level at lunchtime. Will be workshops on the driver's license issues, the issues regarding notarios and those things around that, advocacy on defer action and voting rights protection. So if you can keep those questions now for those times, that would be great. Please raise your hand for questions regarding Commonwealth Activities. Okay, let's go to the first question here.
Walter, really quickly, before we do that, I have to correct the website I gave out earlier for the Virginia Coalition of Immigrant Rights. It is Immigrant Rights VA, immigrantRightsVA.org. That's the website for the Virginia Coalition of Immigrant Rights. Thank you.
We'll start with the first question. Can you please tell us your name and where did you come from? And after you ask your question, I'm going to move to another section of the church here so that we can alternate. So please tell us your name and where you come from, please.
I'm the Reverend Catherine Campbell from La Iglesia de San Jose y La Iglesia de Cristo Rey. And looking at these wonderful data points, one of the things that is bandied around was the fact that the immigrants are taking away jobs from other people. And if you look at this, it says, well, okay, well, they're in the labor force market and they're doing really, really well. So are they, in fact, taking away jobs from others, and how do we counter that?
Sure. So one of the other key findings of our work, which is also available on our website in our comprehensive report we did last year called Critical Assets that looks at this very carefully, is we document the ways in which immigrants are working in all sectors of Virginia's economy. at rates that are very similar to the level of the native-born population.